When we reached the 1990s, the chamber appeared very dated. It was decorated for 1970s, so it was very modern. But by the 1990s, anybody who lived through that period understands that something decorated for modern in the 70s, it became very dated. So we updated the chamber in the 1990s. At that time, a decision was made to move to a more traditional chamber, but there was also a desire to have a historical impetus placed on the chamber so that there would be things that would be of interest not just to the members, but also to the general public who use the chamber, as well as the general public who would have an opportunity to view it. At that time, a decision was made to commission an artist. What we ended up getting from that artist was a lot different than what was originally envisioned. The original envisionment was just some general paintings or murals reflecting the history of the state. This artist, who we ended up commissioning, Christopher Stills from Tarpon Springs, had a vision that we didn't even have. And he was able to lay down on 10 pieces of canvas really a window to Florida's history. But he did it in a very unique way, and I'm going to walk you through some of those things today. This, for instance, this painting, this mural represents what Christopher Stills would say is about 10,000 years of native Florida history. You know, when we think of natives here, a lot of times we think of the Seminoles, but the Seminoles are actually a relatively new tribe to the state of Florida. They didn't arrive in Florida until the 1700s. If you are looking at these native tribes, you're talking about the Calusa, the Tamaqua tribe, the Appalach tribes that no longer exist. They were here for a part of the early period of Florida after the explorers arrived, and this one really reflects a lot of this. Here you have a Tamaqua native boy. He's out fishing. You can see his fishing basket here next to his canoe, and he's pointing to the arrival of the explorers. Now, this would be Ponce de Leon coming on shore in 1513. If you wanted to really understand one of the significant differences about what Christopher Stills did with these murals, he wanted almost a Where's Waldo effect. He wanted there to be an ability to be left with something memorable. And so here's an example that shows up here. I explained about this being a native boy pointing off to the arrival of the Spanish explorers. If you look immediately to the mural on the opposite side of the chamber, you have a Florida native boy who is out fishing, who's pointing to the departure of explorers on the space shuttle, okay? The other thing that you'll notice in this painting, you'll see this light is reflecting on these bowls here. And it almost doesn't make sense because you can clearly see that the horizon in the back, the sun is shining, so there wouldn't be reflection here. Well, the reflection is actually coming from the space shuttle that is reflected in that mural there. So the artwork is not only playing off each other, this is also reflective of a window into Florida's history, but the window is also looking into the history that's occurring inside the chamber, and we'll see that. If you saw the movie Glory with Matthew Broderick, you would of course know about the 54th Massachusetts. They actually were an all African-American fighting unit. They actually fought here in this state. After the Battle of Olustee, the Union were taking their wounded back to the port of Jacksonville. The train broke down. The 54th literally strapped the train on their backs to pull it to a point where the train could be repaired, and that's what's reflected here in this mural. You also see the industries that were important to that war effort, but also the industries important to the state at that period would be salt. Of course, you have turpentine, you have timber, you have cattle, and these are actually foundation cattle. These longhorns that the Spanish would have originated back with the Spanish bringing cattle into the state. This is also a good mural to reflect two things. One, Christopher Stills painted all of the Florida sports teams that existed during that period, collegiate sports teams. So you have the Florida Rattlers, you have the USF Bulls, you have the UCF Knights over there, of course you have the Florida Seminoles that we've already seen, and you have the Florida Gators over here. Another thing that is reflected in this mural, the original mural we saw begins with the sun rising, then you have the early morning, then you have the afternoon, then you have, as the sun's going down, here we have dusk, and here we have nighttime, and then you have a new day starting over here. So again, this is a lot of play on the murals reflecting an artistic value more so than just painting a history of the state. Here you have actually the birth of our tourism industry. Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, wrote a book called Palmetto Leaves, and it talked about the beautiful land of Florida. Among other things, it talked about the beautiful land of Florida that could be traveled. Tour operators began having tourists come into the state, traveling down what would have been our highways during that period. This would have been our waterways. And if you look in this mural, you can see the outline of the state of Florida. This is embedded in each one of the murals. It's hidden. Here you see the state of Florida outlined. And you can see the waterways of the state, which are made by the branches of this tree. Christopher Stills, the artist, is actually here on the boat. He painted himself into the artwork, and he's looking at the Florida Gazette outline of the state as well. You also have the delivery of our mail during that period. Florida, again, the highways of the state were used to deliver the mail close by. Here you have the birth of new things in Florida during this period. Of course, the Greek immigrants brought us the sponge industry, which is reflected by the divers outfit as well as the sponges there. Tourism, of course. You have first in transportation in this period, actually the first commercial flight, for instance, which took you from St. Petersburg, Florida, all the way to Tampa. First commercial flight was actually in Florida. You have new forms of transportation. This is Flagler's Bridge. That's, of course, in those days, prior to the hurricane destroying the railroad bridge, was by rail. And of course, this is partially the foundation for the 7 Mile Bridge down to the Keys. You have the reflection of the outline of the state as it was viewed there. In that period, tobacco, of course, Rawlings writing the Yearling in this period. Of course, To Have and to Have Not is reference to Ernest Hemingway. You have the reference to Zora, who's a writer prominent in the African American community, and of course citrus becoming very prominent in this period as well. Also, interestingly enough, you'll notice these initials here. These are some of the agencies that were created during the FDR administration, which were active here, helped us develop some of our original parks in the state of Florida. Among other things. Conservation Corps, of course, is very active here as well. To reflect the 20th century or the current days, interestingly enough, even the murals themselves are beginning to get dated. Christopher Still's daughter, for instance, is now a freshman in college. These are his 2 daughters here reflected in the murals. You have a number of things that are shown here. This, for instance, the invention of air conditioning. You have the Jeb Bush's laptop computer, a reference to the election crisis that was here in the state with the I vote, or vote I did on the computer here. You've got Hurricane Andrew coming on shore. You have a gavel from the chamber. Donald Duck, which is reference to orange juice, but also can be reference to Walt Disney World. In this period. Of course, you had the folded American flag and the pilot's helmet here reflecting the number of troops that were actually trained in the state of Florida, dating back to Spanish-American War. Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Florida was used predominantly as a training base, particularly for jungle warfare. And then all the way up into modern conflicts with the number of bases that we have here. One prominent other thing, of course, the birth of the film industry here in Florida. Of course, we have Weeki Wachee Silver Springs, the amusement parks located here. You have Claude Pepper's Social Security card, and the raccoon, which a lot of people ask about, is reference to the he-coon of Florida Lawton Childs. These last two murals were originally not intended to be in the chamber. The last two murals were actually reflecting the natural history of the state. And they were added because mainly a lot of the members, particularly in the front, if you look back to the chamber, you see these two very vacant areas. What I like about this is reflecting the saltwater reefs, which are a national treasure, not just a state treasure. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing some precision in colors, you're seeing precision in shape, and you're seeing precision in the variety of life underneath Florida's oceans. And why I say that when I use the word precision is that Christopher Stills actually developed an underwater painting process so that he could get what you would see if you were wearing a diver's mask underneath the water. If you were wearing a diver's mask, you could actually see what you would see when you were wearing that mask. And so in order to do that, he had to be able to paint firsthand from the colors and the shapes and the variety of animal life that he was seeing. And this is what he was able to do by developing that process. Our last one that we'll talk about is actually my favorite one, and it's a favorite for several reasons. One, you'll see elements that are reflected in this mural that tie you into the next mural. There are artifacts that are contained here that are actually contained in that original one. The landmass that has been covered, a lot of what wasn't previously underwater is now underwater. Another thing that you're seeing here is I told you that Christopher Stills hid the shape of the state in each one of these in addition to putting it into a map. Here you have it reflected in the barnacles on the back of this manatee. The other unique thing that I like that is just statistically important that really surprises a lot of people. Now, we have people from all over the world that come into this chamber, people from Germany, England, Sweden, France, who we've had the pleasure of being able to take around and talk to them about it. But it's always fun to see a Floridian to find out that their state is a state that produces 19 billion gallons of fresh water, groundwater in its aquifer underneath the state, and that's one of the significant things that our state's known for. It's the largest freshwater aquifer in the world, and that's what this one largely reflects is the value of that fresh water that we have through these freshwater springs in our state.